The boss froze when he saw that the new gardener's pendant was the same as his missing son's. The morning came slow over the Caldwell estate, like it always did. Richard stood at his office window on the second floor, coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the sun bleed gold across 15 acres of perfectly manicured gardens. He'd stopped tasting his coffee years ago. Stopped tasting most things, really. 53 years old, and he felt ancient. The gardens below were flawless, every hedge trimmed to precision, every flower bed arranged like something out of a magazine. The marble fountains gleamed white in the early light. The stone pathways wound through it all like veins. Beautiful, perfect, empty. 20 years, 2 decades since Daniel disappeared, and Richard had kept everything exactly as Margaret wanted it. Before the grief took her too, the gardens were her legacy, their son's memorial, a shrine to a life that ended before it really began. Mr. Caldwell. Helen's voice came from the doorway, soft and careful. She'd learned to be gentle with him over the years. The new gardener's here. Should I show him where to start? Richard waved a hand without turning. You handle it. He heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, and he was alone again. The way he preferred it. The way he'd been for longer than he cared to count. His eyes drifted to the photograph on his desk. The last one taken of Daniel, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, holding up a baseball glove that was too big for his small hands. Those bright brown eyes shining with everything good in the world. That was 3 hours before Susan took him to the park. 3 hours before Richard's entire life shattered into before and after. He'd been in New York on business, closed a deal worth millions while his son vanished into thin air. By the time he got the call, Daniel had been gone for 6 hours. The police searched for weeks, then months. Then they stopped searching at all. And Susan, his own sister, had stuck to her story like gospel. Said she'd turned around for 1 second. Just 1 second. And he was gone. Vanished into the Saturday afternoon crowd at Morrison Park. She'd cried all the right tears. Said all the right things. Richard had wanted to believe her, but he never really did. There was something in her eyes that day, when she came back to the house without Daniel. Something that looked less like shock and more like fear, like guilt. He'd replayed that moment 1,000 times in his mind, trying to pin down what felt so wrong about it. Richard drained the last of his cold coffee and grimaced. He needed to stop. Needed to stop seeing conspiracy in every shadow, searching for his son in every brown-eyed kid who passed him on the street, the therapist he'd seen, back when Margaret was still alive and begging him to get help. Said he was stuck in the denial stage of grief. 20 years stuck. That had to be some kind of record. He turned back to the window, ready to lose himself in paperwork, when something caught his eye. The new gardener had started working near the hydrangea beds, Margaret's favorites. The guy was young, maybe late 20s, dressed in worn jeans and a faded gray t-shirt, baseball cap pulled low. Nothing unusual about him, except Richard couldn't look away. The gardener moved with this careful precision, like he actually cared about what he was doing. Not just going through the motions like the last 3 guys Richard had hired and fired. This one touched the plants like they mattered, trimmed the hedges with steady hands, crouched down to check the soil. Richard told himself he was being ridiculous, told himself to get back to work, but his feet carried him closer to the window anyway, watching this stranger move through Margaret's garden like he belonged there. The morning wore on. Richard tried to focus on the contracts spread across his desk. Something about a merger. Numbers that should have mattered. But his eyes kept drifting back to the window. The gardener had moved to the rose bushes now, working in the full sun. Had to be getting hot out there. Around noon, the young man straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. He reached for a water bottle he'd left in the shade, tilting his head back to drink. That's when it happened. The guy's shirt shifted, pulling open slightly at the collar, and there, hanging from a thin, tarnished chain around his neck, was a small silver pendant. A lion. Richard's coffee cup slipped from his fingers. The sound of shattering glass seemed to come from very far away. His heart stopped, then kicked into overdrive, hammering against his ribs so hard it hurt. No, it couldn't be. His hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. He leaned closer to the glass, certain his eyes were playing tricks. Had to be. 20 years of hoping had finally driven him crazy, just like everyone always said it would. But the pendant was still there, catching the sunlight. Unmistakable. Richard had spent weeks searching for that pendant. Had it custom made by a jeweler in Prague. One of a kind. The man had guaranteed it. Hand-carved silver, a lion in mid-roar, tiny emerald chips for eyes. He'd given it to Daniel on the morning of his 7th birthday. Fastened it around his son's neck with shaking hands while Margaret took pictures. Lions protect their family, he'd told Daniel. You wear this, and you'll always be safe. Always find your way home. 4 hours later, Daniel was gone, and the pendant went with him. Richard stumbled backward from the window, his mind reeling. This wasn't possible. That pendant was unique. There was no way, absolutely no way, some random gardener would just happen to have it. Unless. His breath came in short gasps, his vision blurred at the edges. 20 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope came crashing down on him all at once. Helen appeared in the doorway, alarmed. Mr. Caldwell, are you all right? I heard something break. The gardener, Richard managed, his voice barely above a whisper. What's his name? Helen blinked, confused by the urgency in his tone. Ethan, I think, Ethan Rivers. Are you sure you're... Where did he come from? Who recommended him? The agency sent him over, said he'd been working estates around Pasadena for a few years. Excellent references. Richard wasn't listening anymore. He moved back to the window, searching the garden below. The young man, Ethan, had returned to his work, oblivious to the earthquake he'd just triggered upstairs. Ethan Rivers, 27 years old. If Richard had to guess, the right age, the right build, and wearing a pendant that should have been impossible for him to have. Richard's hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. He wanted to run down there right now, grab the kid by the shoulders, demand to know where he got that lion, demand to know everything. But something held him back. Maybe it was fear. Fear that he'd finally lost his mind completely. Fear that there was some perfectly rational explanation, and he was about to make a fool of himself. Fear that if he asked, the fragile hope beginning to bloom in his chest would shatter just like his coffee cup. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a different kind of fear. The fear that after 20 years of searching, after 20 years of an empty house and an emptier heart, his son had just walked into his garden, and Richard had no idea what to do about it. Richard didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. He sat in his office until well past midnight. The pendant burned into his mind like an afterimage. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. That silver lion catching the sunlight, swinging gently against Ethan's chest. Daniel's pendant, his son's pendant. It had to be. But how? The question circled his thoughts like a vulture. How does a random 27-year-old gardener end up with a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry that disappeared with a 7-year-old boy 2 decades ago? Richard pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he never let Helen clean. Inside was a worn shoebox, edges soft with age. He lifted the lid carefully, like it might crumble in his hands. Photographs. Dozens of them. Daniel at 6 months. Gummy smile and chubby fists. Daniel at 2, covered in birthday cake. Daniel at 5, missing his front teeth. And the last ones. Daniel at 7, holding that baseball glove, wearing that pendant for the first time. Richard's throat tightened. He picked up one photo, ran his thumb across his son's face. 20 years, and the ache never dulled. People said time healed all wounds. Those people were liars. The memory hit him like it always did. Sharp and sudden and utterly unwelcome. April 15th, 2004, Saturday afternoon. Richard had been in Manhattan, sitting in a conference room on the 42nd floor, closing a deal that would secure the Caldwell Company's future for the next decade. His phone buzzed during the final handshakes. Susan's name on the screen. He almost didn't answer. Susan only called when she needed money, but something made him pick up. Richard. Her voice was wrong. Too high, too tight. Richard, Something happened, Daniel. His blood went cold. What about Daniel? We were at Morrison Park. I turned around for just a second, I swear, just 1 second. And he was gone. I've been looking everywhere. I called the police. They're searching, but the rest of the conversation dissolved into white noise. Richard was already running for the elevator, his briefcase forgotten on the conference table. The flight back to LA was the longest 3 hours of his life. By the time he reached the house, it was evening. Police cars lined the driveway, their lights painting the mansion in red and blue. Margaret was on the front steps, collapsed in Helen's arms, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, and Susan stood off to the side. Mascara streaked down her face, hands shaking, eyes wild. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I only looked away for a second." Richard had wanted to believe her, wanted to wrap his arms around his sister and tell her it wasn't her fault, that these things happened, that they'd find Daniel. But when he looked into Susan's eyes, he saw something that made his stomach turn. Fear, but not the fear of a woman who'd lost her nephew. The fear of someone who'd done something terrible and knew she'd gotten caught. Richard set the photograph back in the box, his hands trembling. He'd never told anyone about that instinct. Not Margaret, not the police, not the private investigators he'd hired over the years. It sounded crazy, paranoid. His own sister couldn't. But the doubt had lived in him ever since. A splinter he couldn't dig out. The investigation went nowhere. The police searched Morrison Park for days, dragged the pond, interviewed hundreds of people, found nothing. Daniel had simply vanished, like he'd never existed at all. Except Richard knew better. Someone took his son. Someone planned it. And Susan had been the only one there. 3 years later, Margaret died. The doctors called it a heart attack. But Richard knew the truth. She'd died of grief, died of a broken heart that never healed, died waiting for a son who never came home. And Susan had cried at the funeral, played the devastated sister and aunt, then asked Richard for money 2 weeks later to cover her credit card bills. He'd given it to her. He always did. What else did he have to spend it on? The next morning, Richard was back at his window before sunrise, watching, waiting. Ethan arrived at 7:30, right on time. Same worn jeans, same faded shirt, same careful way of moving through the garden. Richard tracked his every step, searching for something, anything, that felt familiar. The way he walked, the tilt of his head, the set of his shoulders. Was he imagining it? Or was there something in the way Ethan moved that reminded him of Margaret? That same quiet grace, that gentle efficiency. God, he was losing it, around 9. Helen brought him coffee. "You haven't moved from that spot in 2 hours." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." She set the cup down firmly. "You've been staring at that boy like he's a ghost." Richard's jaw tightened. Helen knew him too well. 30 years she'd worked in this house. She'd been here when Daniel was born, here when he disappeared, here when Margaret died. She saw everything. "What do you know about him?" Richard asked, still not looking away from the window. "Ethan, not much. Agency said he's reliable, hard worker, keeps to himself mostly." "Where's he from?" Helen paused. Why the sudden interest? "Just curious." "Richard?" She moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to where Ethan was pruning the rose bushes. "What's going on?" He wanted to tell her. Wanted to grab her shoulders and say that pendant. "Helen, do you remember that pendant?" But the words stuck in his throat. Saying it out loud would make it real. And if he was wrong, if this was just his desperate mind playing tricks, he didn't think he could survive the disappointment. "Nothing," he said finally, just making sure he knows what he's doing. Helen didn't buy it. He could tell by the way she was looking at him, worry creasing her forehead. But she didn't push. She never did. After she left, Richard made a decision. He needed to talk to Ethan, needed to see him up close, hear his voice, maybe find some reasonable explanation for the pendant. He headed downstairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. The April sun was warm on his face as he stepped into the garden. Ethan was crouched near the hydrangeas, carefully working fertilizer into the soil. He looked up when Richard approached, startled. "Mr. Caldwell." He stood quickly, wiping dirt from his hands. "Is there something wrong? Did I do something?" No. Richard forced what he hoped was a casual smile. "Everything looks great. I just wanted to introduce myself properly, Richard Caldwell." He extended his hand. Ethan shook it, his grip firm and warm, up close. Richard could see details he'd missed from the window. Light brown eyes, a scar above his left eyebrow, calloused hands from years of physical work, and the pendant. God, the pendant was right there, close enough to touch. Ethan Rivers, the young man said. "It's good to meet you, sir. This is a beautiful property. Your wife must have had an amazing eye for design." Something twisted in Richard's chest. "She did. She passed away, though, years ago." "I'm sorry." Ethan's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I can tell she put a lot of love into this place. I'll do my best to keep it up to her standards." They stood there for a moment, and Richard scrambled for something to say, something that wouldn't sound insane. "That's a nice pendant," he heard himself say. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Ethan's hand went to his chest automatically, fingers brushing the silver lion. "Oh, thanks. I've had it forever. Family heirloom?" A shadow passed across Ethan's face. "Not exactly. It's kind of a long story. I've got time." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I grew up in foster care in LA. This pendant was with me when they found me. Only thing I had." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. No idea where it came from. No memories of anything before the children's home. Just this lion and a lot of questions nobody could answer. Richard's world tilted. The garden spun around him. He gripped the nearby fence post to steady himself. "You okay, Mr. Caldwell?" "Fine. Just the sun." Richard forced himself to breathe. "You said foster care. How old were you?" 7, I think. Maybe younger. The records were kind of a mess. Ethan shrugged. "I used to imagine all kinds of stories about where I came from. Rich family, poor family. Maybe my parents were spies or something." Another humorless laugh. "Kids stuff, you know." Eventually, I stopped wondering. 7 years old, found with no memories, with Daniel's pendant around his neck. Richard felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an impossible truth. "Well," he managed, his voice barely steady, "I should let you get back to work." "Yes, sir." Richard walked back to the house on autopilot. His mind raced, connecting dots, drawing lines between past and present. By the time he reached his office, he'd made up his mind. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A private investigator named Marcus Chen, who'd helped him search for Daniel in those early years. "Marcus, it's Richard Caldwell. I need your help with something, and I need you to be discreet." Marcus Chen arrived 3 days later, discreet as promised. They met in Richard's office after midnight, curtains drawn, door locked. The investigator looked older than Richard remembered, grayer at the temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but his gaze was still sharp. "You sounded urgent on the phone," Marcus said, settling into the leather chair across from Richard's desk. "What do we got?" Richard slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photos he'd taken of Ethan over the past few days, working in the garden, taking a lunch break, talking with Helen, and close-ups of the pendant, zoomed in as much as his phone camera would allow. Marcus studied them in silence. When he looked up, his expression was carefully neutral. "Richard, I have to ask, are you sure about this? That's why you're here. To make sure. 20 years is a long time. A lot of kids end up in foster care. A lot of kids have jewelry. Not like that." Richard pointed to the pendant photo. "I had it custom made in Prague. One of a kind. The jeweler guaranteed it." Marcus sighed. "Okay, what do you need from me?" "Background check on Ethan Rivers. Everything you can find, where he's been, who raised him, how he ended up with that pendant." Richard paused. "And I need a DNA sample analyzed quietly. You want me to collect it?" "Already done." Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed plastic bag. Inside were strands of hair he'd collected from the garden tools Ethan used. "Can you rush the analysis?" Marcus took the bag, examining it with professional detachment. "This isn't exactly standard procedure. I know what I'm asking." "Do you?" Marcus leaned forward. "Richard, if this kid really is Daniel, and that's a massive if, you're about to turn his entire world upside down, not to mention yours. Are you prepared for that?" Richard's hands clenched into fists. "I've been preparing for 20 years. That's not what I mean." Marcus's voice softened. "What if he doesn't remember you? What if he does, and he's angry you didn't find him sooner? What if he's not Daniel at all, and I'm losing my mind?" Richard finished. "I know, but I have to know for sure, one way or another." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll have preliminary results in 48 hours. Full background check will take about a week. Thank you. After Marcus left, Richard stood at his window, watching the dark garden below. Somewhere out there, Ethan was sleeping in the small apartment he rented in town. Completely unaware that his entire existence was being pulled apart and examined, Richard tried to imagine the conversation. Hey, Ethan. Funny thing. I think you might be my son who disappeared 20 years ago. Surprise, God. What a mess. The next afternoon, Susan showed up unannounced. Richard heard her voice downstairs, that familiar sharp edge when she talked to Helen. His sister had a way of making even simple requests sound like orders. He braced himself as her heels clicked up the marble staircase. She swept into his office without knocking. Designer handbag over one arm, sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled blonde hair, 50 years old and still beautiful in that cold, cultivated way, like a museum piece you could look at but never touch. Richard, darling, she kissed the air near his cheek. You're not answering my calls. I've been busy, too busy for family. She settled into a chair, crossing her legs. I need to talk to you about the Thompson investment. I think we should... She stopped mid-sentence. Through the window, Ethan was visible in the garden, trimming the hedges near the fountain. Susan's face went pale, just for a second. So quick Richard almost missed it. But it was there. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and something that looked a lot like terror flashed across her features. Then she caught herself, smiled, looked away. New gardener. Her voice was too casual. Started last week. Richard watched her carefully. Name's Ethan. Seems competent. Susan opened her handbag, pulling out her phone like she'd lost interest. But her hands were shaking. Anyway, about the Thompson deal. Susan. Richard kept his tone light. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't be ridiculous. I'm fine. She scrolled through her phone, not looking at him. Just tired. You know how it is. She stayed for another 15 minutes, talking about investments and family trust funds and all the usual topics she used as preamble before asking for money. But the whole time, her eyes kept darting to the window, to Ethan, and every time she looked, that fear crept back into her expression. When she finally left, Richard sat very still, his mind racing. Susan recognized Ethan, or thought she did, the way she'd frozen when she saw him. That wasn't surprise. That was recognition followed by panic. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. I need you to dig into Susan's finances, specifically anything unusual around April 2004. Your sister. Marcus sounded surprised. Just do it, please. That evening, Helen knocked on his office door. She had that look, the one that meant she was about to say something he didn't want to hear. We need to talk, she said. About whatever's going on with you and that boy. She closed the door behind her. I've worked in this house for 30 years, Richard. I'm not blind. Richard set down his pen. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Helen sat down uninvited. You've been watching him like a hawk, taking photos when you think nobody's looking. And then Susan shows up, sees him, and practically runs out of here. Helen! I saw her face. Helen interrupted. I was bringing tea when she spotted him through the window. She looked terrified. Richard, why would your sister be terrified of a gardener? The room was very quiet. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the office in shades of amber and gold. I always wondered, Helen said softly, about that day, the day Daniel disappeared. Richard's head snapped up. What do you mean? Susan came back here without him, said he'd vanished at the park, but her clothes were clean. Richard, perfectly clean. You don't spend hours searching for a missing child in a park without getting dirty, without getting desperate. Helen's eyes were wet, and she wasn't desperate. She was scared. There's a difference. Why didn't you say anything? To who? The police. With what evidence? A gut feeling. Helen shook her head. Besides, you were falling apart. Margaret was falling apart. I thought maybe I was wrong. Thought maybe grief was making me see things that weren't there. And now there's a boy in our garden wearing a pendant I remember seeing on Daniel the morning he disappeared. Helen's voice cracked. Richard, please tell me I'm not crazy. He wanted to tell her she was imagining things, that it was impossible, that coincidences happened. But he couldn't. Not when he was thinking the exact same thing. I don't know, he admitted. I'm having him checked out. DNA test, background check, everything. Helen nodded slowly. And if it's him, then Susan has a lot of questions to answer. She'll run. Not if she doesn't know we're onto her. Richard stood, pacing to the window. Ethan was packing up his tools for the day. I need proof first. Real, solid proof. Then we'll deal with Susan. And Ethan, when are you going to tell him? When I'm sure, not before. He turned to face Helen. I can't do this to him if I'm wrong. Can't get his hopes up. Make him think he has a family. And then, Richard. Helen stood, crossing the room to grip his shoulders. You're protecting yourself, not him. The words hit harder than they should have, because she was right. He was terrified. Terrified of hope. Terrified of disappointment. Terrified that even if Ethan was Daniel, his son wouldn't want anything to do with the father who'd failed to protect him. Just, he managed, give me a few more days, please. Helen studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. A few days. But Richard, whatever's happening here, whatever the truth is, it's coming out. You can't keep it buried forever. After she left, Richard returned to the window, watched Ethan drive away in his beat-up Toyota, heading back to whatever small apartment he called home. Somewhere in the city, the truth was waiting, hidden in old records, forgotten files, maybe even Susan's guilty conscience. Richard had spent 20 years searching for his son. He could wait a few more days, but not much longer. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Preliminary DNA results tomorrow morning. Background check taking longer. Foster system records are sealed. Working on it. Richard set the phone down with shaking hands. Tomorrow he might finally have answers. The question was, would those answers destroy him or save him? The tension in the Caldwell mansion grew thick as fog over the next few days. Richard could barely focus on work, his mind constantly drifting to the DNA results that hadn't arrived yet. Marcus had texted, "Lab backed up, one more day." One more day felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, Susan had started showing up more frequently, dropping by for lunch, asking about estate business, always finding an excuse to linger near the windows overlooking the garden, watching Ethan with those careful, calculating eyes. She was planning something. Richard could feel it. Your sister's been here 3 times this week, Helen mentioned on Thursday morning, setting down Richard's coffee. That's more than the last 3 months combined. I noticed. She's scared of something. Helen glanced toward the window. Or someone. Richard followed her gaze. Ethan was working near the tool shed, organizing equipment. The morning sun caught the pendant around his neck, making it flash like a signal. Keep an eye on her, Richard said quietly. Let me know if she does anything unusual. Helen nodded, understanding in her eyes. That afternoon, Richard found himself in the garden on the pretense of inspecting the roses. Really, he just wanted to be near Ethan, wanted to study the young man's face, search for traces of the boy he'd lost. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan looked up from the flower bed, surprised. Something wrong with the landscaping? No, just taking a walk. Thought I'd see how things were coming along. Great, actually. Ethan gestured to the freshly mulched beds. These roses needed some serious TLC, but they're responding well. Your wife knew what she was doing when she planted them. There it was again, that easy mention of Margaret, like Ethan somehow understood the garden's significance without being told. You seem to have a real feel for this place, Richard observed. Ethan smiled, a little embarrassed. Sounds weird, but yeah. From the first day I got here, it felt, I don't know, familiar maybe, like I'd been here before, even though I know I haven't. Richard's heart skipped. Familiar how? Hard to explain. Just comfortable, I guess. Like the garden's telling me what it needs. Ethan laughed at himself. That definitely sounds crazy. Not crazy at all. They stood there for a moment. The silence comfortable. A bird sang somewhere in the magnolia tree. The fountain burbled softly. Can I ask you something? Ethan said suddenly. Of course. Why'd you hire me specifically? The agency said you'd turned down their last 3 recommendations. Richard hesitated. Because I saw my dead son's pendant around your neck wasn't exactly an appropriate answer. You seemed different. he said instead. More genuine than the others. Ethan nodded slowly, like he was trying to decide if that was the whole truth. Before he could ask anything else, Helen's voice called from the house. Mr. Caldwell? Phone call? Richard excused himself. Heading back inside, Helen met him at the door, her expression tight. It's Marcus, she said quietly. Says it's urgent. Richard's pulse jumped. He took the call in his office, door locked. Tell me, he said without preamble. DNA results are in? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. Richard, you should sit down. Just tell me. A pause. Then, it's a match. 99.98% probability. Ethan Rivers is Daniel Caldwell. The room spun. Richard gripped the edge of his desk, his legs suddenly weak. 20 years of searching, hoping, grieving, and there it was. 4 words that changed everything. Ethan Rivers is Daniel Caldwell. Richard, you still there? I'm here. His voice came out hoarse. You're sure there's no mistake? No mistake. I had them run it twice. The kid's your son. Richard sank into his chair, emotions crashing over him in waves. Relief, joy, overwhelming grief for all the lost years. And underneath it all, a rising tide of rage. Susan. Susan had done this somehow. She'd taken Daniel and made him disappear, and she'd spent 20 years lying about it. There's more, Marcus continued. I found something in Susan's financial records, April 22nd, 2004, 1 week after Daniel disappeared. She made a cash withdrawal for $50,000. $50,000. And here's where it gets interesting. I tracked down the foster home where Ethan was placed. Talked to a former social worker there. She remembered him. Said a woman dropped him off. Claimed she'd found him wandering alone. No ID, no memories. Just that pendant. Richard's hands were shaking. Did she describe the woman? Mid-40s. Well-dressed, nervous. She donated $10,000 to the home that same day, in cash. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so ugly Richard could barely look at it. Susan hadn't just allowed Daniel to disappear. She'd orchestrated it. Paid someone to take him, then dumped him at a foster home like unwanted baggage. The question was why. I need more time to dig, Marcus said. Find out who took the other $40,000. What exactly happened that day at the park. But Richard, whatever you're planning to do with this information, I'm going to confront her. I figured just be careful. If she's capable of what we think she did, I'll be careful. After hanging up, Richard sat in the dark office for a long time. His son was alive, working in his garden, 27 years old, with no idea who he really was, who his father was. Richard wanted to run down there right now, grab Ethan, tell him everything. But Marcus was right. This needed to be handled carefully. Ethan's entire identity was about to be shattered. He deserved better than having it blurted out in a garden. First, Richard needed the whole truth, and that meant dealing with Susan. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Richard was reviewing documents when he heard shouting from outside. He rushed to the window and saw chaos in the garden. Ethan was on the ground near the tool shed. The extension ladder lay beside him, one side splintered and broken. Helen was running toward him, phone already to her ear. Richard bolted from the office, taking the stairs 2 at a time. By the time he reached the garden, Helen was kneeling beside Ethan, who was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Don't move, Helen was saying. Ambulance is coming. What happened? Richard demanded, dropping to his knees beside them. The ladder. Ethan's voice was thick, confused. It broke. Shouldn't have broke like that. Richard looked at the ladder. The break wasn't clean. It looked deliberate, like someone had partially sawed through the support beam, leaving just enough to hold until weight was applied. His blood ran cold. Who else has been out here today? He asked Helen. Just Ethan. Although, Helen's face paled. Susan was here early this morning. Said she was taking a walk through the garden. I saw her near the shed. Richard's vision went red. Susan had tried to hurt Ethan, maybe even tried to kill him, to protect her secret. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The EMTs checked Ethan over, concerned about the head injury. They insisted on taking him to the hospital for observation. "I'll ride with you," Richard said. "Mr. Caldwell, you don't have to." "I'm coming." At the hospital, they stitched up Ethan's forehead and ran tests. Mild concussion, the doctor said. He'd be fine, but they wanted to keep him overnight for monitoring. Richard sat by Ethan's bed in the ear, watching the young man drift in and out of sleep. In repose, with his guard down, the resemblance to Margaret was striking. The same gentle features, the same way his eyebrows drew together when he dreamed. Around midnight, Ethan stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He looked confused for a moment, then focused on Richard. "You're still here." "Of course." "Why?" The medication made Ethan's voice soft, wondering, "I'm just the gardener." "No," Richard thought. "You're my son. You're everything I lost and spent 20 years searching for." But he said, "Because you got hurt on my property, that makes you my responsibility." Ethan's eyes drifted closed again. Just before he fell back asleep, he murmured something that made Richard's breath catch. "I had a dream about a park and a woman who said my family didn't want me anymore, said I'd be better off." His words slurred, fading. Why would she say that? Richard's hands clenched into fists. He knew exactly who that woman was, and she was going to answer for what she'd done. Richard didn't leave the hospital all night. He sat in that uncomfortable chair beside Ethan's bed, watching his son sleep, trying to reconcile the baby he'd lost with the man before him. 20 years compressed into a single moment of impossible truth. Every so often, Ethan would stir, murmuring fragments of dreams Richard couldn't quite hear. The nurse came in periodically to check vitals, giving Richard sympathetic looks he didn't deserve. She probably thought he was a caring employer. She had no idea she was looking at a father keeping vigil over a son who didn't know him. Dawn broke gray and cold through the hospital window. Richard's phone buzzed. A text from Helen. Susan called asking about Ethan, told her he's fine. She sounded relieved, then scared. Good. Let her be scared. Around 7, Ethan woke properly, wincing at the light. His hand went to the bandage on his forehead. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked. "Like I fell off a ladder." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Oh, wait. The doctor says you can go home today after they run one more scan. You really didn't have to stay all night." "Mr. Caldwell." "Richard. Call me Richard." The formality suddenly felt unbearable. "And yes, I did." Ethan studied him with those brown eyes. Margaret's eyes, confusion evident. "I don't understand. Why do you care so much?" "Because you're my son. Because I lost you 20 years ago and just found you. Because every second I don't tell you feels like another lie. Let's just say," Richard said carefully, "you're more important than you realize." Before Ethan could push further, the doctor arrived with discharge papers. Richard drove him back to the mansion, insisting Ethan stay in one of the guest rooms instead of going home alone. "I'm fine, really. You have a concussion. Doctor's orders say observation for 24 hours. Helen will take excellent care of you." Ethan finally relented, too exhausted to argue. Once Ethan was settled upstairs, Richard locked himself in his office with Marcus on speakerphone and a folder of evidence spread across his desk. "I've got more," Marcus said. "The woman who dropped Daniel at the foster home. Her name was Caroline Mitchell. She died in a car accident in 2010, so we can't question her directly, but I found her bank records. $40,000 deposited 3 days after Daniel disappeared, withdrawn from an account Susan had access to." Richard's jaw clenched. "So Susan paid this woman to take Daniel." "Looks that way. Mitchell had connections to underground adoption networks. The illegal kind, my guess. Susan hired her to make Daniel disappear, gave her 50 grand. Mitchell took 40, donated 10 to the foster home to look charitable, and dumped the kid there. Why?" Richard's voice was hoarse. "Why would Susan do this? Money's usually the answer. I pulled Susan's financial records from 2003 to 2004. She was drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, gambling losses, bad investments. She owed serious people serious money, and Daniel was her solution. Your father's will," Marcus continued. "I reviewed it. If anything happened to Daniel, Susan was next in line for his trust fund. $3 million. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. His sister had sold his son for money, erased a 7-year-old boy's entire existence, traumatized him, stole his identity and his family, all to pay off gambling debts. But Daniel didn't die, Richard said slowly. So how did she access the money? She had him declared legally dead after 7 years. 2011. You were still grieving Margaret at the time. Probably didn't notice the paperwork. Richard remembered that year. The fog of depression so thick he could barely function. He'd signed whatever documents Susan put in front of him, trusting his sister to handle estate matters while he fell apart. She'd used his grief as cover to complete her crime. I need copies of everything, Richard said, his voice deadly calm. Bank records, the will, the death declaration, everything that proves what she did. Already emailed them, Richard. This is enough for criminal charges. Kidnapping, fraud, probably more. I know what I could do. Richard stared at the DNA report on his desk. But first, I need to confront her. I need to hear her say it. That's a bad idea. She's already tried to hurt Ethan once. I'll be careful. Just get me those documents. After hanging up, Richard sat in the quiet office, rage and grief warring inside him. Part of him wanted to call the police immediately, watch Susan dragged away in handcuffs. But another part, the part that had spent 20 years wondering, doubting, hoping, needed to look her in the eye and hear the truth. He needed her to admit what she'd done to his son. That afternoon, Richard called Susan. "Darling," she answered, voice too bright. "How's your gardener? I heard about the terrible accident." "He's fine. Staying here for observation." "That's good. You know, maybe you should consider hiring someone more experienced. These young workers can be so careless." "I need you to come to the house," Richard interrupted. "Tonight we need to talk." A pause. About what? About Daniel. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard could practically hear Susan's mind racing on the other end. "Richard, I don't think... Tonight, 7 o'clock, don't make me come find you." He hung up before she could refuse. Helen found him an hour later, standing at his office window, watching Ethan sleep in the guest room across the garden courtyard. "You're going to tell him," she said. Not a question. "Soon, not yet." "Why not?" "Because I need to do this right. He deserves to know the whole truth. Not just that I'm his father, but what happened to him. Why he lost 20 years. Richard's reflection in the window looked older than he felt. "And before I can tell him that, I need Susan's confession. She won't confess. She will, because if she doesn't, I'll bury her with evidence." Helen was quiet for a moment. "And after Susan confesses and Ethan knows everything, what then?" "I don't know." Richard's voice cracked. "What if he hates me? What if he blames me for not finding him sooner?" "Richard, I had resources, Helen. Money, connections, private investigators. I should have found him. Should have known Susan was lying. Instead, I let her declare him dead while he was alive, growing up alone in foster care." Tears burned his eyes. What kind of father does that? The kind who was lied to by someone he trusted. Helen's hand rested on his shoulder. "You didn't fail, Daniel. Susan did, and she's about to pay for it." At 6:30, Richard heard a car in the driveway. Susan, arriving early, probably hoping to control the conversation. He watched from the window as she stepped out, designer heels clicking on the stone path. She dressed carefully. Elegant dress, perfect makeup, armor for battle. She had no idea she'd already lost. Richard met her in the main sitting room, doors closed. No witnesses except Helen stationed discreetly outside. "Richard." Susan kissed his cheek, her perfume cloying. "This is all very mysterious. What's so urgent?" "Sit down." Something in his tone made her hesitate, but she sat, crossing her legs, handbag in her lap like a shield. Richard remained standing, pulled a folder from the side table. "I want to tell you a story," he began quietly, "about a woman who was drowning in debt, who owed dangerous people money she couldn't pay, who saw her nephew's trust fund as the solution to all her problems." Susan's face went pale. "I don't know what..." "So this woman," Richard continued, "hired someone named Caroline Mitchell, paid her $50,000 to make a 7-year-old boy disappear. And then she lied, told everyone the child vanished at a park, played the devastated aunt while her brother fell apart." "Stop." Susan's voice shook. "She waited 7 years, then had the boy declared dead so she could claim his inheritance. $3 million to pay off her debts. Richard opened the folder, pulled out bank statements. Want to see the receipts, Susan? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He threw the DNA report on the coffee table between them. Ethan Rivers is Daniel Caldwell, my son, your nephew, the boy you sold 20 years ago. Susan stared at the paper like it might bite her. All color drained from her face. That's impossible, she whispered. 99.98% match. He's been working in my garden for 2 weeks. And you knew. That's why you've been so scared. That's why you sabotaged the ladder. I never meant. Susan's perfect composure cracked. Her hands shook. Richard, please. You have to understand. I was desperate. They were going to kill me if I didn't pay. So you sold my son. Richard's voice was quiet, deadly. You traumatized a 7-year-old child, stole his identity, his family, his entire life, because of gambling debts. Susan started crying. Real tears this time, not the practiced ones she'd used at Margaret's funeral. I'm sorry, God, Richard. I'm so sorry. I never thought. I didn't know she'd just dump him at a foster home. Caroline said she'd find him a good family. Said he'd be adopted quickly. Have a better life. He spent 20 years in the system, Richard roared. 20 years alone, with no memories, no family, thinking nobody wanted him. I know, and I've regretted it every day since. Not enough to tell the truth. Not enough to stop me from falling apart. To stop Margaret from dying of grief. Richard's voice broke. She died thinking our son was dead, Susan. Our son was alive, and you let her die believing he wasn't. Susan collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. Richard stood over her, fury and grief warring in his chest. This was his sister, his blood, and she'd destroyed his family. Get out, he said quietly. Richard, please, get out of my house. The police will contact you. Susan looked up, mascara streaming. I'm turning over every piece of evidence to them. You're going to pay for what you did, Susan. All of it. She stood on shaking legs. One last desperate attempt. If you do this, it'll be a scandal. The Caldwell name dragged through every... I don't care about the name. I care about my son. Susan stared at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed her purse and fled, heels clicking rapidly toward the door. After she was gone, Richard sank into the chair, his whole body shaking. 20 years of questions, answered. 20 years of grief, validated. Helen appeared in the doorway. Is it done? It's done. Now came the hardest part, telling Ethan the truth. Ethan woke in the guest room to late afternoon light, filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the throbbing in his head reminded him. The ladder, the hospital, Mr. Caldwell insisting he stay at the mansion. Richard. He'd said to call him Richard. That was weird, right? Your boss didn't usually insist on first names and personal hospital vigils. Ethan touched the bandage on his forehead, trying to piece together the last 24 hours. Everything felt fuzzy around the edges, like looking through dirty glass. He sat up slowly, testing for dizziness. The room was beautiful. Antique furniture, oil paintings on the walls, windows overlooking the garden he'd been tending. Way too nice for a gardener with a concussion. A soft knock on the door. Helen entered with a tray. Soup, bread, tea. You're awake. Good. Doctor said you need to eat. You didn't have to. Hush, eat. She set the tray on his lap with the firmness of someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. How's your head? Feels like I got hit by a truck. Close enough. Helen sat in the chair by the window, watching him with an odd expression, like she was studying him. You don't remember me at all, do you? Ethan paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. Should I? No, I suppose not. She smiled sadly. You were very young. I'm sorry. Helen shook her head. Never mind, old woman talking to herself. Eat your soup before it gets cold. But the comment stuck with Ethan as he ate. Helen was acting strange. Come to think of it, everyone in this house was acting strange. Richard's intense attention, Helen's knowing looks, even the way they watched him, like they were waiting for something. After Helen left, Ethan tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, fragments kept surfacing, not quite memories, more like impressions. A child's perspective of tall hedges, the smell of roses, a woman's laugh, warm and loving. He'd been having these flashes since starting work here, déjà vu moments that felt too specific to be coincidence. Like his body remembered this place even if his mind didn't. The doctors always said his amnesia was likely psychological. Some trauma his 7-year-old brain couldn't process. So it shut everything down. 20 years of therapy, hypnosis, everything. Nothing brought the memories back. But lately, since coming to the Caldwell estate, something was shifting. Dreams getting clearer, images more vivid. Last night in the hospital, hopped up on pain meds, he'd dreamed about a park, a woman's face, older, blonde, scared. She'd been kneeling in front of him, gripping his shoulders. Listen to me carefully. Your family doesn't want you anymore. They asked me to take you somewhere better. You understand? This is better for everyone. Even now, awake, the memory made his chest tight. That feeling of abandonment, of not understanding why his world was ending, had that been real, or just his brain making up stories? Ethan got out of bed, restless. He moved to the window, looking down at the garden. From this angle, he could see the tool shed where he'd fallen. The broken ladder was gone, but something about the incident bothered him. He'd checked that ladder 2 days ago. It was solid. He always checked his equipment. Lesson 1 from foster care was trust nothing and no one. So how had it just snapped? Unless someone wanted it to snap, the thought came unbidden, paranoid. But once it arrived, Ethan couldn't shake it. Susan, Richard's sister, had been near the shed that morning. Helen mentioned it at the hospital, and Susan had been watching him all week with these strange, fearful eyes. What was she so afraid of? That evening, Richard knocked on Ethan's door. "Feel up for some company?" "Sure, come in." Richard entered carrying 2 mugs of tea, handing one to Ethan. They sat in the chairs by the window, the silence surprisingly comfortable. "I owe you an apology," Richard said finally. "The ladder, I should have had all the equipment inspected regularly. This was my negligence. It's not your fault some ladder decided to break." Still, Richard's jaw tightened. "You're under my care. I take that seriously." There it was again. That intensity, like Ethan mattered beyond just being an employee. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan set down his tea. "And I want an honest answer." Richard nodded slowly. "Of course. What's really going on here? You've been watching me since day 1. Helen looks at me like she knows me. Your sister acts terrified whenever I'm around. And now you're sitting here treating me like..." Ethan struggled for words. "Like I'm someone important, but I'm just a gardener." Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "What if you weren't just a gardener? I mean, what's that supposed to mean? Those dreams you mentioned in the hospital, the park, the woman who said your family didn't want you? Have you had more like that?" Ethan's skin prickled. "How did you? Have you?" "Yeah, since I started working here. Fragments, mostly impressions. Sometimes I'll be in the garden and suddenly know where something is before I've seen it, like the stepping stones that lead to the fountain. I knew they'd be there before Helen showed me." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I sound crazy." "You're not crazy." Richard leaned forward. "Ethan, those aren't just dreams. They're memories." "That's impossible. I don't have memories before the foster home." "You do. They're just buried." Richard's hands were shaking. "This house, this garden, you've been here before, when you were very young." Ethan stood abruptly, his heart pounding. "What are you talking about? Please sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you react." The intensity in Richard's voice made Ethan obey. He sank back into the chair, gripping the armrests. 20 years ago, Richard began, I had a son named Daniel. He was 7 years old, bright, happy, loved this garden more than anything. His mother planted every flower here for him. Past tense. Ethan's throat tightened. What happened? He disappeared. My sister was watching him at a park and he vanished. We searched for years. Eventually, we assumed he was dead. My wife died of grief 3 years later. I've spent every day since wondering what happened to him. Richard's eyes were wet. Until 2 weeks ago, when a young gardener showed up wearing a pendant I gave my son the morning he disappeared. Ethan's hand went automatically to his chest, touching the silver lion, the only piece of his past he'd ever had. "No," he whispered. "That's not... You can't be saying..." "I had DNA tests run. Yours and mine." Richard pulled a folded paper from his pocket, hands trembling. "Ethan, you're not just a gardener. You're my son. You're Daniel Caldwell." The room spun. Ethan gripped the chair, his breathing shallow. This was insane. Impossible. People didn't just find their lost children 20 years later working in their gardens. "You're lying. I'm not." Richard held out the paper. "Read it yourself." Ethan took it with numb fingers. The words swam. Paternity probability. 98%. Genetic markers consistent with biological father-son relationship. "I don't understand." His voice came out broken. "If you're my father, why didn't you find me? Why was I alone for 20 years? Because I didn't know where to look. Because the person I trusted most in the world lied to me." Richard's voice hardened. "My sister, Susan, she didn't just lose you at that park, Ethan. She sold you." "What?" "She was in debt, desperate. She paid someone to take you and make you disappear. Then she lied about it. Spent 20 years lying while you grew up in foster care." The fragments clicked into place. The woman in the park. Susan. Those scared eyes. The way she'd gripped his shoulders. "Your family doesn't want you anymore. She told me." Ethan breathed. "She told me you didn't want me." Richard's face crumpled. "God, Ethan, no. I wanted you more than anything. I've been searching for you every day since you disappeared. Your mother died still looking for you." Tears were streaming down Ethan's face now. 20 years of thinking he was unwanted, unloved, abandoned. 20 years of being nobody when he'd been somebody all along. "I had a family," he whispered. "I had you, and she took that away." "She did, but I'm going to make sure she pays for it." Richard moved to kneel in front of Ethan's chair, looking up at him with desperate hope. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, no reason to believe any of this. But Ethan, Daniel, I'm your father, and I'm not letting you go again." Ethan looked down at this stranger, who wasn't a stranger, saw his own eyes reflected back, brown, like his mother's apparently were, saw 20 years of grief carved into every line of Richard's face, and somewhere deep inside, in a place he didn't know still existed, something recognized him. "Dad, I don't know how to do this," Ethan admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be someone's son. Neither do I after all this time." Richard's laugh was wet with tears. "But maybe we can figure it out together." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Richard stood slowly, and for a moment they just looked at each other, father and son, separated by 20 years and brought back together by a silver pendant. Then Ethan stood too, and Richard pulled him into an embrace. Ethan stiffened at first, not used to being held, to being wanted, but then something broke inside him. All those years of loneliness, of wondering who he was, where he came from, he'd come home. The next 3 days passed in a blur of revelations and adjustments. Richard had Marcus compile every piece of evidence against Susan. Bank records, witness statements, the DNA results. Everything. The folder grew thicker by the hour. Ethan spent most of that time in the preserved bedroom that had been his. As a child, Helen had taken him there the morning after Richard's revelation, opening the door to a time capsule frozen in 2004. "Your father couldn't bring himself to change anything," she'd said softly. Now Ethan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by pieces of a life he couldn't remember. Baseball posters on the walls, a shelf full of picture books, drawings taped above a small desk, crude crayon renderings of stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, and me. He picked up a stuffed lion from the bed, worn soft from years of hugging. Something about it felt familiar in his hands. "Safe. You carried that everywhere," Richard said from the doorway. "Refused to sleep without it." Ethan turned, still holding the toy. "I don't remember. The doctors said the memories might come back gradually, or they might not come back at all." Richard entered the room carefully, like he was afraid of disturbing something sacred. "Either way, it doesn't change who you are, who we are. Daniel Caldwell." Ethan tested the name. "It still doesn't feel real. You can keep using Ethan if you want, or use both. Whatever feels right. Ethan set down the lion, moving to the window. The view overlooked the garden. His garden now, apparently. Everything he'd been tending for the past 2 weeks had been planted by his mother. For him. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "My mother, Margaret." Richard's expression softened with old grief. She was beautiful, kind, had this laugh that could light up a whole room. He moved to stand beside Ethan. She loved this garden more than anything. Used to say plants were like children. Give them love and attention, and they'd thrive. She sounds wonderful. She was. Richard's voice cracked. She died 3 years after you disappeared. The doctor said heart attack, but I know better. She died of a broken heart. Died waiting for you to come home. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. A mother he couldn't remember, who died grieving for him. Another thing Susan had stolen. "I'm sorry I don't remember her. Don't apologize. None of this is your fault." Richard gripped his shoulder. What Susan did, the lies, the trauma, all of it, that's on her. Not you. A knock on the doorframe made them both turn. Marcus stood there, folder in hand, expression grim. "We need to talk," he said. "It's about Susan." They gathered in Richard's office. Richard, Ethan, Marcus, and Helen. Marcus spread documents across the desk like evidence at a trial. "Susan's been busy since your confrontation," Marcus began. "Emptying bank accounts, selling assets. My contact at her bank says she withdrew $200,000 yesterday. Cash. She's running," Richard said flatly. "Looks that way. I also found something else." Marcus pulled out an old photograph. Grainy and aged. "This is Caroline Mitchell, the woman who took Daniel to the foster home." Ethan studied the photo. The face triggered something. A flash of memory. Blonde hair, cold eyes. The smell of cigarette smoke. "I remember her," he said slowly. Not clearly, but she was the one, at the park. "Susan paid her $50,000 to make you disappear," Marcus continued. "Mitchell kept 40, donated 10 to the foster home as a cover. She died in 2010, so we can't question her, but I traced her known associates." He pulled out another photo. "Recognize this woman." Ethan's blood ran cold. It was Susan, 20 years younger, but unmistakably her. They knew each other, Marcus said. Mitchell ran an underground adoption ring, the illegal kind. Rich people paid her to acquire children, no questions asked. Susan was one of her clients. "But she didn't have me adopted," Ethan said, confused. "She dumped me at a foster home. Because you were too risky. 7 years old, not a baby. You had memories, language, identity. Mitchell couldn't place you with a family. Too much chance you'd talk. Remember something, 'cause problems." Marcus tapped the documents. "So she took Susan's money and got rid of you the easiest way possible. A public foster home with overworked staff and messy records." The casual cruelty of it made Ethan feel sick. He'd been merchandise that didn't sell, inventory to be discarded. "I want to confront her," he said suddenly. "Susan. I want to hear her admit what she did." "Ethan," Richard started. "I need this." Ethan's voice was firm. 20 years she let me think I was nobody, that I wasn't wanted. I need to hear her say why." Richard studied his son's face. The determination there, the barely contained anger. Finally, he nodded. "Then we do this together." Marcus made the call. Susan agreed to meet at the mansion that evening, probably thinking she could manipulate Richard one more time, convince him not to press charges. She had no idea Ethan would be there. They set up in the formal sitting room. Richard and Ethan waited while Helen showed Susan in. She entered in full armor, designer suit, perfect makeup, confident smile. The smile died when she saw Ethan. "Hello, Aunt Susan," Ethan said quietly. "Remember me." All color drained from Susan's face. She stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe. "Richard, what is this?" "This is your nephew, the one you sold 20 years ago." Richard's voice was ice. "Sit down. We're going to have a conversation." "I don't have to." "Sit down." The command in Richard's voice made Susan obey. She sank into the chair, hands trembling, eyes darting between Ethan and the door like a cornered animal. Ethan moved to stand in front of her. Up close, he could see the resemblance. Same bone structure as Richard, Same eye shape. Family. I remember the park, Ethan said. Fragments of it anyway. You told me my family didn't want me anymore, that I'd be better off. I was trying to protect you. Don't. Ethan's voice sharpened. Don't lie to me anymore. I know everything. The debt, Caroline Mitchell, the $50,000, all of it. Susan's face crumpled. You don't understand. I had no choice. These people I owed money to, they were going to kill me. So you sold a 7-year-old child. Richard stood, towering over his sister. You traumatized him, stole his identity, his family, his entire childhood, because of gambling debts. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Susan was crying now, mascara streaming. Caroline said she'd find him a good family, said he'd be adopted quickly, have a better life than we could give him, I thought. You thought nothing, Ethan interrupted. You wanted money, that's it. You didn't care what happened to me as long as you got paid. That's not true. I called Caroline for weeks after, asking about you, but she wouldn't tell me anything. Said it was safer if I didn't know. Safer for you, you mean? Richard's hands clenched into fists. You let Margaret die thinking our son was dead. You watched me fall apart for 20 years and said nothing. I was scared. Don't you understand? If I told the truth, I'd go to prison. I'd lose everything. And what did Daniel lose? Richard roared. He lost his parents, his home, his name. 20 years of his life gone, because you were too much of a coward to face what you'd done. Susan was sobbing openly now, but Ethan felt no pity, only a cold, clear anger. I spent 20 years wondering who I was, he said quietly, wondering why nobody wanted me, why I'd been abandoned. I had a family who loved me, and you took that away, for money. I'm sorry, Susan choked out. God, Daniel, I'm so sorry. Don't call me that. You don't get to call me that. Ethan's voice was steel. You're not my family. You're nothing to me. Susan looked up at Richard, desperate. Please, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but we're family. Blood. Doesn't that count for something? You stopped being family the day you sold my son, Richard said coldly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. You're going to confess everything, and you're going to pay for what you did. Richard. Wait! The only choice you have is whether you confess voluntarily or wait to be arrested. Either way, this ends today. Susan looked between them, her brother's cold fury, her nephew's devastated rage. She'd lost. They both knew it. I'll confess, she whispered. Just please, give me a day. Let me get my affairs in order. Say goodbye. No. Richard's voice was final. Marcus has been tracking your accounts. We know you're planning to run. The police are already on their way. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer, Susan stood on shaking legs. I really am sorry for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but you're right, Ethan said. It doesn't. 2 police cars pulled up the driveway, lights flashing. Marcus met them at the door. Folder of evidence in hand, within minutes, they were reading Susan her rights. She looked at Richard one last time. I hope you can forgive me someday. I won't, Richard said simply. They led Susan away in handcuffs, her expensive heels clicking on the marble one last time. Through the window, Ethan watched the police car disappear down the drive, taking his past with it. It's over, Richard said softly. Is it? Ethan turned to face his father. She's going to prison, but that doesn't give me back 20 years. Doesn't bring back my mother. No, it doesn't. Richard's eyes were wet. But it's justice. And maybe, after justice, we can start to heal. Ethan nodded slowly. The anger was still there, burning bright, but underneath it, something else was growing. Hope. The day of Susan's arraignment arrived cold and gray. Richard stood in his office, adjusting his tie in the mirror, preparing for what would be the most public moment of the Caldwell family's darkest chapter. You don't have to go, Ethan said from the doorway. Marcus can represent us. I need to be there. We both do. Richard turned to face his son. She needs to see what she destroyed, what she failed to destroy. Ethan nodded, though his face was pale. He'd barely slept in the 3 days since Susan's arrest. The media had gotten hold of the story. Billionaire's sister arrested in decades-old kidnapping, and the mansion had been under siege by reporters ever since. Helen appeared with coffee, her expression worried. The car's ready, but Richard, the press outside. I know. We'll go through the back gate. The courthouse was chaos. News vans lined the street, reporters shouting questions as Richard and Ethan pushed through with their lawyer. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Mr. Caldwell, how does it feel to find your son after 20 years? Daniel, what do you want to say to your aunt? Is it true she sold you for gambling debts? Ethan kept his head down, Richard's hand firm on his shoulder, guiding him through the storm. They'd agreed beforehand. No statements, no comments. Let the evidence speak. Inside the courtroom, the chaos muted to whispers. Richard and Ethan sat in the front row as Susan was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, all that designer armor stripped away, revealing the broken woman underneath. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but her lawyer touched her arm, shaking his head. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Please be seated. We're here for the arraignment of Susan Marie Caldwell on charges of kidnapping, child endangerment, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor stood, reading the charges in clinical detail. Each one landed like a blow. Ethan sat rigid beside Richard, jaw clenched, hands gripping his knees. When asked how she pleaded, Susan's voice was barely a whisper. Guilty. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Her lawyer looked stunned. Clearly they'd planned to plead not guilty. Buy time, maybe negotiate a deal. But Susan was done running. Your Honor, she continued, voice shaking, I'd like to make a statement. The judge hesitated, then nodded. You may speak, but I remind you that anything you say can be used against you. I understand. Susan turned to face Richard and Ethan directly, tears streaming. 20 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I was drowning in debt, desperate, and I convinced myself that what I was doing was somehow right, that Daniel would be better off. Her voice cracked on his name, but I was lying to myself. The truth is, I was selfish, cowardly. I put my problems above the life of an innocent child. My nephew. She looked at Ethan. I told you your family didn't want you. That was the cruelest lie of all. Your father never stopped looking for you. Your mother died waiting for you to come home. And I let them suffer because I was too weak to face what I'd done. Ms. Caldwell, the judge warned. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Susan wiped her eyes. I stole 20 years from this family, from Daniel. I can't give those years back. I can't undo the damage. All I can do is tell the truth and accept the consequences. She turned to the judge. I'm guilty of everything they're charging me with. Guilty of things they're not charging me with. I don't want a trial. I don't want to plead down. I want to pay for what I did. The courtroom was silent. Even the prosecutor looked surprised. Very well, the judge said slowly. Given your guilty plea, we'll move directly to sentencing. Does the victim's family wish to make a statement? Richard stood. He'd prepared remarks with Marcus, a careful statement about justice and closure. But standing there, looking at his sister's broken form, different words came out. My sister took everything from me, he began, voice steady. She didn't just kidnap my son. She murdered my wife. In a way, Margaret died of grief, of a broken heart, because she couldn't live in a world where Daniel was gone. Susan watched that happen, watched me fall apart, watched our family disintegrate, and she said nothing. Susan's shoulders shook with sobs. For 20 years, I've lived with a hole in my life so big I thought it would swallow me. I survived, but I didn't live. Every day was just getting through until the next. Richard's voice grew stronger. And Daniel, my son, grew up alone, in foster care, thinking nobody wanted him, thinking he was abandoned. That damage doesn't just heal because we found each other. He paused, looking at Susan. You asked me for forgiveness. You said you hoped one day I could forgive you. Richard's voice hardened. I won't. What you did is unforgivable. You stole my child, destroyed my family, and lied about it for 2 decades. The only reason you're confessing now is because you got caught. Richard, Susan started. But, Richard continued, cutting her off, I won't let you destroy any more of our lives. You've taken enough, so I'm not going to waste energy hating you. I'm going to focus on my son, on rebuilding what we lost. You're simply not worth my time anymore." He sat down. The dismissal in his voice was absolute. The judge turned to Ethan. "And you, Mr. Caldwell, would you like to speak?" Ethan stood slowly. He'd told Richard he didn't want to make a statement, didn't want to give Susan any more of his words, but now, standing in this courtroom, he realized he needed to say something. Not for her, for himself. "I don't remember my 7th birthday," he began. "I don't remember my mother's face or my father's laugh, or what this garden looked like when I was a kid. Those memories are gone because of you." Susan pressed her hand to her mouth, crying harder. "I spent 20 years in the system. Do you know what that's like? Moving from home to home, never belonging anywhere. Other kids got adopted, got families. I watched them leave while I stayed behind, wondering what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I good enough? Daniel, please. You made me think I was worthless." Ethan's voice rose. "You made a 7-year-old child believe his own family threw him away. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? The therapy, the nightmares, the constant feeling that I'm not real, that I don't matter? I'm sorry. Stop saying you're sorry." Ethan's control broke. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back my childhood. Sorry doesn't bring back my mother." His voice cracked. "She died not knowing I was alive. I'll never meet her, never hear her voice because of you." The courtroom was utterly silent. Ethan took a shaking breath. "But you know what? I survived. Despite everything you did, I survived. I made something of myself. I learned to work hard, to value things that matter. And now I have my father back. We're going to build a relationship. We're going to be a family." He looked Susan dead in the eye. "And you're going to be alone, in prison, with nothing but your guilt and your regrets. That's justice. That's what you deserve." He sat down, trembling. Richard reached over, gripping his hand. The judge cleared his throat, clearly affected. "Ms. Caldwell, you've committed heinous crimes against your own family. You've shown profound selfishness and cowardice. However, your guilty plea and apparent remorse are noted." He looked at his papers. "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in state prison for kidnapping. With additional concurrent sentences for the other charges, you'll be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 10 years. In addition, you are ordered to pay restitution to Daniel Caldwell in the amount of $500,000 for damages and suffering." The gavel fell. Final. Guards moved to take Susan away. She looked back one last time at Richard and Ethan, her face devastated. "I really am sorry," she whispered. Neither of them responded. They watched her being led away, out of their lives, hopefully forever. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed again. This time, Richard stopped at the microphones. "I'll make one statement," he said, voice firm. 20 years ago, my son was taken from me through an act of unspeakable cruelty. Today, justice was served. My family is focused now on healing, on moving forward. We ask for privacy as we rebuild our lives. Thank you." He turned away, ignoring the shouted questions, guiding Ethan through the crowd. In the car, Ethan finally exhaled. Is it really over? The legal part is. The hard part, healing, rebuilding trust, being a family again, that's just beginning. Ethan looked at his father. "Are we going to be okay?" Richard reached over, squeezing his shoulder. "Yeah, eventually we are," as they drove away from the courthouse. Leaving Susan and the past behind, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The anger was still there, raw and real, but it wasn't consuming him anymore. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't just surviving, he was coming home, 3 weeks after the sentencing. Life at the Caldwell mansion began to find a new rhythm. The media frenzy had died down. The reporters moved on to other scandals, and Richard and Ethan were left to figure out what being father and son actually meant after 20 years apart. It wasn't easy. Some days were good, sharing breakfast while Helen fussed over them both, walking through the garden together, Ethan pointing out what needed attention while Richard listened. Those moments felt almost normal, like they were building something real. Other days were harder. Ethan would wake from nightmares, fragments of foster homes and faceless adults who'd promised to care for him and didn't. Richard would find old photographs and disappear into his grief, mourning the years he'd lost. They were two broken people trying to fit pieces together that didn't quite match anymore. "This is weird, right?" Ethan said one morning, sitting across from Richard at breakfast. "I mean, we're basically strangers who happen to share DNA." Richard set down his coffee. "It is weird. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But you want this? Want me here? More than anything." Richard's voice was firm. "Ethan, I know we can't get back those 20 years. I know I can't just step in and be the father I should have been. But I want to try, if you'll let me." Ethan nodded slowly. "I want that too. I just don't know how." "Neither do I." Richard smiled sadly. "Maybe we figure it out together." Helen appeared with more coffee, her eyes suspiciously wet. "You two are going to be just fine," she announced. "Now eat. You're both too skinny." That afternoon, Richard made a decision. He found Ethan in the garden, pruning roses with the same careful attention he always showed. "Can we take a drive?" Richard asked. "There's something I want to show you." They drove in comfortable silence through Pasadena. Heading toward the older part of the city, Richard pulled up in front of a small cemetery. Gates open, paths winding between headstones. "Your mother's here," he said quietly. "I thought maybe you'd want to meet her, in a way." Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, I'd like that." They walked together through the cemetery until Richard stopped at a simple but elegant headstone. Margaret Ann Caldwell, beloved wife and mother, 1970, 2007, forever in our hearts. Fresh flowers sat in the vase. Richard must come here regularly. Ethan knelt down, touching the cold marble. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry I took so long to come." Richard stood behind him, hands in his pockets. "I come here every week. Tell her about the garden, about business, about life, these past few weeks. I've been telling her about you, about finding you. What do you think she'd say if she could see me now?" "She'd cry, happy tears." Richard's voice was thick. "Then she'd hug you until you couldn't breathe and ask if you've been eating enough. She was like Helen that way, always worried about whether people had enough to eat." Ethan smiled through his tears. "Tell me more about her, please." They sat on the grass beside the headstone, and Richard talked about Margaret's love of gardening, her terrible singing voice, the way she'd laugh until she snorted, how she'd wanted more children, but complications meant Daniel would be their only one, how devastated she'd been when he disappeared. "She used to sit in your room," Richard said quietly, "for hours, just sitting there waiting, like if she stayed long enough, you'd walk through the door." He wiped his eyes. "After she died, I couldn't change anything. Couldn't pack away your toys or clothes. It felt like erasing you completely. I'm glad you didn't." Ethan looked at the headstone. "I wish I could remember her, even just a little. You have her eyes, her smile, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. That's pure Margaret." Richard put his arm around Ethan's shoulders. "She's still here, in you, in the garden she planted, in this family." They stayed for another hour, Richard sharing stories while Ethan listened, hungry for every detail about the mother he'd lost. When they finally left, Ethan felt both lighter and heavier, grief for what he'd missed, but also connection to something larger than himself. Family, real family. That evening, Richard called Ethan into his office. Legal papers were spread across the desk. "I've been working with my lawyers," Richard explained. "Having your identity legally restored, birth certificate, social security, everything. You're officially Daniel Ethan Caldwell now." Ethan looked at the documents. His name, both of them, printed in official type. Real, legal, true. "I kept Ethan," he said, touched. "It's who you've been for 20 years that matters. You're not just the boy I lost. You're also the man you became despite everything." Richard paused. "There's also the matter of the estate. You're my heir, Ethan. The company, this property, all of it will be yours someday. I don't want your money. I know. That's why I'm giving it to you." Richard smiled. "But that's not what I wanted to show you." He pulled out another document, a proposal for a foundation, the Daniel Caldwell Foundation for Missing Children. Richard read, "I've allocated $5 million to start. The mission is to help families of missing children, fund investigations, provide resources that the police can't or won't, maybe help other kids like you find their way home. Ethan stared at the proposal, overwhelmed. You're doing this because of me. I'm doing this because Susan was right about one thing. I was absent, too focused on business, not focused enough on what mattered. I can't change that, but maybe I can help other families not make the same mistakes. Can I help with the foundation? Richard's face lit up. I was hoping you'd say that. I thought maybe you could sit on the board, help guide the mission. You understand what these kids go through better than anyone. Yeah, Ethan's voice was firm. Yeah, I want to do that. They shook hands. Then Richard pulled him into a hug. These embraces were getting easier, more natural, the stiffness fading into genuine warmth. A week later, Ethan made a decision of his own. He found Richard in the library reading. I've been thinking, Ethan began, about therapy for both of us. Richard looked up. You think we need it? I know I do. 20 years of abandonment issues don't just disappear because I found out the truth. And you, Ethan sat down. You've been grieving for 2 decades. That doesn't just go away either. You're right. Richard closed his book. I've been avoiding it, telling myself I'm fine now that you're back. We're both messed up. Maybe we should be messed up together, with professional help. Richard laughed. A real laugh, the first Ethan had heard from him. When did you get so wise? 20 years in the foster system. You learn quick or you don't survive. They found a therapist who specialized in trauma and family reunification. Dr. Sarah Chen had kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that both men appreciated. The first session was awkward, sitting in her office, trying to explain their situation, but she didn't flinch. You've both been through extraordinary trauma, she said, and you're trying to build a relationship that was violently disrupted, that takes time, it takes work. Are you both committed to that work? Yes, they said in unison. Over the following weeks, therapy became their anchor. They learned to talk about the hard stuff. Richard's guilt about not finding Ethan sooner. Ethan's anger at the childhood that was stolen. They learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days they'd take steps backward. That was okay. You're allowed to be angry, Dr. Chen told Ethan during one session. At Susan, at the system, even at your father for not finding you. Anger is part of grief. I don't want to be angry at him, Ethan said, glancing at Richard. He's a victim too. You can acknowledge that and still feel your feelings. They're both true. Slowly, painfully, they worked through it. And slowly, the relationship began to feel less like an obligation and more like something real. One evening, Ethan found Richard in the garden at sunset, standing near the fountain where Margaret's ashes had been scattered. You okay? Ethan asked. Just thinking about how much has changed in a month. Richard turned to him. You know, when I first saw that pendant around your neck, I thought I was losing my mind, that grief was finally making me see things that weren't there. And now I think maybe grief brought us back together. All those years of not giving up, of keeping your room the same, of maintaining this garden. Maybe it was the universe's way of making sure you'd recognize home when you found it. Ethan stood beside him, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky orange and gold. Do you believe that? In the universe having a plan? I didn't, but now. Richard looked at his son. Yeah, I think I do. The silver lion pendant caught the dying light, throwing small reflections across the water, a symbol of protection that had, against all odds, led a lost boy home. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. For what? For never giving up. For keeping the door open, for letting me be both Daniel and Ethan. He smiled. For being my dad. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for coming home. They stood together as night fell, father and son, finally where they belonged. 6 months had passed since that day in the courthouse. Spring had given way to summer, and the Caldwell estate bloomed with life it hadn't seen in 20 years. Ethan woke early, as he always did. But now it was by choice rather than necessity. He dressed and headed downstairs, where the smell of Helen's coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. Morning, Richard said, looking up from the newspaper. He'd started taking mornings off, spending them with Ethan instead of buried in work. Sleep okay? Yeah, no nightmares. Ethan poured coffee, settling into what had become his chair. That's 3 nights in a row. Progress. Richard smiled. Dr. Chen would be pleased. They'd been in therapy for months now. Individual sessions and family sessions. The work was hard, sometimes painful, but it was working. The nightmares were coming less frequently. Ethan could talk about his childhood without shutting down. Richard could look at Margaret's photos without falling apart. Slowly, carefully, they were becoming a family. "Big day today," Helen announced, bringing over plates loaded with eggs and bacon. The foundation launch, right? The Daniel Caldwell Foundation was officially opening its doors. 6 months of planning, hiring staff, setting up systems to help families of missing children. The press conference was at noon. "You nervous?" Richard asked. Terrified. Ethan had agreed to speak at the event, to share his story publicly for the first time. "What if I freeze up there? Then I'll step in. We're a team, remember?" Team. Ethan liked the sound of that. The foundation offices were in downtown Pasadena, a beautiful restored building that felt both professional and welcoming. Staff had been working for weeks to prepare, and now families were arriving. People who'd lost children, who were still searching, who needed hope. Ethan walked through the reception area, looking at the wall they'd created, photos of missing children, some cases decades old. Among them was a picture of 7-year-old Daniel Caldwell, smiling in his backyard, the silver lion pendant visible around his neck. Next to it, a current photo. Ethan at 27, standing with Richard in the garden, the same pendant still around his neck. The caption read, "Never stop hoping, never stop searching." "It's perfect," Richard said, coming to stand beside him. "It's terrifying. What if we can't help them? What if we give them false hope? We won't promise miracles, we'll promise resources, support, and that they're not alone. That's more than most of these families have." Marcus approached, carrying a folder. "5 minutes to showtime. The press is here. Families are seated. You ready?" Ethan took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." The conference room was packed. Reporters with cameras, families clutching photos of their missing children, and advocates who'd been doing this work for years. Richard stepped up to the podium first. "Thank you all for coming. 20 years ago, my son disappeared. For 2 decades. I lived in a nightmare, not knowing if he was alive or dead. 3 months ago, through a miracle I still can't fully explain, he came home." He gestured to Ethan, who stood at the side of the stage, hands gripping the silver pendant. But that miracle was also 20 years too late. My son lost his childhood. His mother never got to see him again. And that's why we're here today. The Daniel Caldwell Foundation exists because no family should have to go through what we went through alone. Richard outlined the foundation's mission: funding investigations, providing resources, supporting families emotionally and financially. Then he stepped aside. "I'd like to introduce you to the reason this foundation exists, my son, Daniel Ethan Caldwell." Applause filled the room as Ethan walked to the podium. His hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. "Hi, I'm Ethan." His voice was steady despite his nerves. "And yeah, I'm also Daniel. For a long time. I didn't know that. I grew up in foster care with no memories of who I was before age 7. I was just a kid the system forgot about." He saw families in the audience nodding, tears in their eyes. "I spent 20 years thinking I wasn't wanted, that I'd been abandoned, that there was something wrong with me." His voice grew stronger. "But I was wanted. I had parents who loved me, a father who searched for me every single day. I just didn't know it, because someone took that knowledge away from me." He paused, letting that sink in. "If you're here because your child is missing, I want you to know something. Don't give up. Keep searching. Keep hoping. Because somewhere out there, your child might be waiting, wondering if anyone's looking for them, wondering if they matter." Ethan's eyes met Richard's across the room. His father was crying openly, not bothering to hide it. "I found my way home because my dad never stopped believing. This foundation exists to help you do the same. We can't promise we'll find every missing child, but we promise we'll never stop trying." The room erupted in applause. Families stood, some crying, some clutching the photos of their children. A woman in the front row, her son had been missing for 12 years, mouthed, "Thank you," after the formal presentation. Ethan and Richard met with families one-on-one. Each story was heartbreaking. Children vanished from playgrounds, teenagers who ran away and never came back, custody disputes that turned into kidnappings. The foundation staff took notes, promised follow-ups, offered immediate support. "This is going to save lives," Marcus said, watching it all. "You know that, right?" "I hope so," Richard replied. That evening, exhausted but satisfied, Richard and Ethan returned to the mansion. Helen had dinner waiting, but neither was particularly hungry. They ended up in the garden instead, walking the paths as the sun set. "Your mother would have loved today," Richard said. "She always wanted to help people. That's why she volunteered at the children's hospital, why she fostered animals. She believed in giving back. Tell me more about her." They'd had this conversation dozens of times now, and each time Ethan learned something new. Tonight, Richard told him about Margaret's terrible cooking, how she'd once tried to make Thanksgiving dinner and set the turkey on fire, about her collection of terrible romance novels, about the way she'd sing off-key in the shower. "She was real," Ethan said. "Not perfect. Very real, very imperfect." Richard smiled. "Just like us." They reached the bench near the fountain, Margaret's favorite spot. Richard sat down, and Ethan joined him. "I found something last week," Ethan said. "In my old room. I wanted to show you." He pulled a small journal from his pocket, edges worn, pages yellowed with age. "It was in a drawer in the desk, my handwriting from when I was 7. Richard took it carefully, like it might disintegrate. He opened to a random page, and his breath caught. "Today, Dad gave me a lion. He says lions protect their family. I'm going to wear it forever and ever. When I grow up, I want to be brave like a lion." Richard's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Crayon drawings of the family, lists of favorite things, a story about a dragon and a knight. And then, the last entry, written the morning Daniel disappeared. "Mom says we're going to the park with Aunt Susan. I can't wait. I'm going to show everyone my lion. If I ever get lost, the lion will help me find my way home." Richard closed the journal, unable to speak. Ethan took it back gently. "He did," Ethan said softly. "The lion brought me home." They sat in silence as darkness fell, the garden around them peaceful. The house behind them glowed with warm light. Helen was probably in the kitchen, cleaning up. The foundation would open its doors to families tomorrow. Life was moving forward. "You know what the therapist said last week?" Ethan asked. "That we're allowed to be happy. That healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means learning to live with it. Are you happy?" Ethan thought about it. 6 months ago, he'd been a gardener with no past and no future. Now he was Daniel Ethan Caldwell, son, heir, co-founder of a foundation that would help countless families. He had a father who loved him, a home that was truly his, and a purpose that gave his stolen years meaning. "Yeah," he said, surprised to realize it was true. "I think I am." Richard pulled him close, and they sat there together as the first stars appeared. The silver lion pendant glinted in the moonlight, having fulfilled its promise after 20 long years. Above them, if you believed in such things, Margaret was watching, smiling. Her family was together again. Her garden was alive again. Her son had come home. And in the quiet evening, with his father beside him and the past finally at peace, Ethan understood something fundamental. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people who never stopped looking for you, the love that survived 20 years of separation, the hope that refused to die. He was home, finally, completely, home. And the lion could rest now.